eels and the industry that's evolving here in the state of Maine, from particularly just down the road at American Unagi with Phil Winnell, who is a aquaculture technician, but that doesn't really speak to what his skills and attributes are, and knowledge are with American eels. So I'll turn it over to him. We are filming this for posterity. Phil's parents asked if we could send a copy to him so that they can see his son and do programs. But in addition, we'll be posting on the webpage as well. So anyway, with that in mind, Phil, thanks a lot.
Yes, thanks.
Appreciate it.
You all set with the recording?
Yeah.
As Tom mentioned, this is American Unagi, and my name is Philip Winnell, and we're going to talk about growing eels, I'll give you a little primer on the biology of this amazing fish. Just kind of, we're all talking about the same thing, and how Maine ties into eel fishing in general, globally, and then we'll kind of focus down on what we've been doing. And growing the American eel in America, which sounds like it makes a lot of sense, but it's not something that's really happened until relatively recently. So, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to. Oh, there we go. So broad strokes. There's 18 very similar species of eels that are all over the world. There's way more species of eels in general, but these ones are kind of the similar ones, and these are the commercially desirable ones. The ones we know the most about are the Japanese eel, the American eel, and the European eel. But there are many more than this that are around the world. This will come up later, but this European and American eel kind of have a similar life history, and they actually breed in a very similar spot as far as we know. And there was, not that long ago, there was one Atlantic eel that speciated into these two distinct species of eels, which I think is super fascinating. So they're really very similar species, and that kind of plays in a little bit later. I'll talk about it. That's the wrong way. Here we go. So life history of this fish. And it is a fish, and some people have a really hard time believing that. They just have a different body form than a lot of people expect for a fish. And these species of eels also do have scales, which a lot of people don't. They're very small, but they do have scales. And they all breed in this kind of, it's like a breeding ground not only for eels, but for a lot of species in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, kind of surrounded by currents. It's almost an island inside of the ocean that is surrounded by currents, and there's a lot of nursery grounds for things like turtles and a bunch of species of sharks and eels. So we'll talk about what eels do there. So they lay eggs at some point in there. As adults, they come and lay eggs, and that egg transforms into a Leptocephali larva, which I have a cool video of them in the next slide. And then what is important for commercial fishery in Maine here is this stage is glass eel elver, where they move onto the continental shelf, get closer to shore, and in the spring start moving up into the rivers all over North and part of South America and all the islands in the Caribbean Sea. So they're very widely distributed, and the only place in the United States where there's a viable elver glass eel fishery really is Maine, a little bit in the Carolinas, North and South Carolina, but really Maine is the one place where these eels have been caught, and it's a very well managed fishery. So this life cycle took a long time to try to learn. There's a lot of interesting history about people discovering this, but this is as far as we know the lifestyle. And so they go from spending this time in the ocean to lay their eggs, and you can see the kind of the color change here. They go into the brackish waters, glass eels, and back into the rivers and streams, and they go all the way deep into into North America. That yellow eel and silver eel stage, which we see here, that's kind of where we as American Unagi would harvest them, or really anyone would harvest them to smoke or prepare in various ways. So a little bit later, we actually have some food for you guys to try, some smoked eel that we have actually smoked in-house at our new facility. So this is the Leptocephali larva. This is after they hatch. They are semi-planktonic, meaning that they do have a little bit of control of their locomotion, but they are generally carried by currents like the Gulf Stream closer to inshore places like Maine, but right off the coast before they transform into glass eels. So I will play this. There's no, but yeah, so they're basically totally transparent. So this is a Leptocephali larva. Mainly eels kind of go, a bunch of species of eels go through this life stage. They do actually have some organs, but they're tiny and you can kind of see a little bit up there. Yeah, they have this jelly substance. Their muscles are kind of visible. I think there's a good, yeah, you can kind of see some striation of muscles, but it's amazing that their whole system is totally clear. And there's a little bit of like organs you can see, but it's just, they're basically totally transparent. And they just eat marine snow, small particles that fall, and they kind of have a very, very simple life stage until they go into this glass eel stage. So, I think this is pretty much it, yeah. Yeah, they're kind of amazing in this stage. They've actually, for a long time, didn't find them in that stage. Oh, there we go. So, I talked a little bit about the range of these eels, but this is a really good graphic to kind of show where they are. We're obviously right up here in Maine, but they're distributed across the entire coast of North America here into northern South America. And so they have a very wide range that they go up into these rivers and streams, and that's where they've been found. The concentration is highest in our section of Canada and North America and into the Gulf of Mexico, but they do actually have a very wide range, which I think could play a really important part as far as their survival and prospering going forward. So this is just the United States, and Bula rostrata is the species name for the American eel. The darker red here is occurrences of eels either having been introduced or they don't know if their eels are established in a lot of portions of the Great Lakes. Lake Ontario and Erie, there's been more sightings, but you can see the river systems are a little bit highlighted here too. The eels have moved up into these systems, and it's amazing to hear people's stories from places as far away as Minnesota of, you know, being a kid and catching eels out of their local pond or creek or stream, and they live a really long time. Some of the females tend to go farther up, and they can live 30, 40 years up in some of these streams, and they actually, dams can be built, a lot of things can happen to their access. So sometimes they get landlocked. So there are a lot of ponds and streams and lakes with landlocked eels that have lived there for a very long time. They don't actually breed in fresh water at all. So a lot of these ones that are landlocked are kind of in a weird stasis, not really reproducing kind of life stage. But I love to hear people's eel stories. If anybody who have eel stories, we kind of want a portion of our website where it would just be like anecdotes from people, you know, growing up fishing for eels, or they saw an eel once, or they're fishing for something totally different, got an eel, and they're like, what the heck is this crazy snake thing? So yeah, I would love to hear people's stories if they have any, but I just love this map of how like it really connects the interior of the United States to the ocean, and it connects a lot of people. So why eels, why now? The title of this presentation, Growing the American Eels in America, probably should give you a little indication. We think that it's kind of a lost resource for a long time in the United States, in Maine especially. the fisheries managed really, really well, and they'll adjust quotas and kind of work with the fishermen, which are a lot of locals around here. Ripley Creek, I think, is probably the closest in Tennant's Harbor there, where I've seen people fishing with fyke nets, which I'll show you in a second. But we like to connect that really well-connected resource with and close the loop, so the eels are raised here. Because right now, 90% of all eels consumed in the world are farm raised, and the majority of that is done abroad in places like China. And the traceability and sustainability of that can be tenuous. There's not a lot of information about how they're raised abroad in a lot of places. So Europe is doing with their eels a lot of aquaculture raising like we are now, but it's very new in the United States, and it's the level of sustainability and traceability that we're doing surpasses what is being done in a lot of places abroad. So, am I going the right way? So, this is what I was just talking about. The eels are caught, most of them caught in Maine. They're exported to places like China and the Philippines. And then a lot of sushi restaurants for a long time would import mature eels back to the United States to be for unagi rolls or kabiaki, which is like a traditional Japanese style of on an open grill, which is really delicious. So we thought, let's bring this back to the U.S. So that we can have a sustainable market. And a lot of sushi restaurants actually, more recently, that have been thinking about traceability and sustainability have actually eliminated unagi out of their menu because they didn't feel comfortable with what the product they can get, the traceability of the product they can get. So they're very excited to buy from us and to be able to offer unagi again, which is a delicious sushi roll. So the Chinese farms growing conditions can be a little bit unknown, and actually the FDA has randomly sampled and they found some antibiotics and some other chemicals that they weren't too excited about in the Chinese eel. So we're hoping to eliminate that by growing it all in Maine. So here's the traditional fishing method. There's one of our fisher people right there. This is called a fyke net. The eels will come in on the incoming tide, and they'll get funneled into a smaller and smaller enclosure, and then they'll be collected. I think as the tide flips, they'll be collected there, and we buy from people like her, from the fishermen in Maine, and we have really good relationships with a lot of them, and they'll call us up when they have their catch, or if they're a certain amount of their quota that we'll take, and we'll raise them here in Maine. So here's a glass eel, an elver, with a little bit of coloration on it. They're very tiny. It's only 1.5 inches long, and they weigh a few ounces, not even. And that's where they start their journey with us, at least. So, and then they get to market size. Here, this is a market size eel. It can be like about 1 foot long and weigh a little bit over 1 pound. We could get them even bigger, but we find that this size is great for harvesting and doing a lot of different things with smoking and just cleaning, filleting, and freezing and packing out. So we do have a lot of customers that like larger eels, but we tend to sell that to sushi restaurants that are looking for a specific size for a specific dish. And we have a lot of flexibility in that way. The fact that they're wild eels, when they catch them here, this is not like at salmon they can pick a specific brand and a specific genetic makeup of their salmon that they're like, oh, this one will grow really well in the conditions that we're going to put them in. These are wild eels that have wild genetics, and so they grow at various speeds, and there's a lot of variability in their color. And so the fact that we get them in at that size and grow them up, you really never know how long it's going to take to raise them to this market size. It could take 9 to 10 months. It could take a year and a half, almost 2 years. So you could work with that as you get that early spike of eels that are ready for market, and then they you'll have that for the next year. After that, you'll have that same class that came in will be up to market size. So you can use it to your advantage, but it's really interesting because I know that a lot of salmon fishers are very strategic about the breed that they pick and how fast it grows and when it'll be market ready. So eel as food. I think it's amazing the variety of dishes and the number of cultures that eat eel, and I'm still learning new preparations. And a lot of our customers here in the United States are first, second generation immigrants that are so excited to be able to get eel shipped to them, and we'd love to hear their stories about how they're preparing it. And I feel like every other week someone says something about, oh, there's this way to prepare it, like in the Philippines they do this, or in Italy I think they eat it with a marinara sauce. In Japan they have several different preparations, but my personal favorite is the kabiaki, which I mentioned before, where you sort of lacquer the eels with like a mirin soy sauce brown kind of sauce, sweet and sour, and grill it, and then keep lacquering it and grill it. And it has a lot of intramuscular fat, so it's a very, chefs like it because it cooks really well, and it can't, I know thinner, flaky fish, sometimes it's a little bit of a really short period of time that you have to cook it and pull it off the grill before it would get overcooked. Eel is very flexible. You can broil it and broil it for a while, like 15, 20 minutes, and it really just gets better. That fat renders out, and it just gets better and better. So, yeah, it's super flexible. It's eaten and all over the world, and being in the United States, that we have so many different cultures come in, we get to experience a lot of these amazing preparations. So we do sell our products available online. There's also limited supply at Jess's Seafood Market in Rockland is the closest place to here. Rising Tide Co-op in Damariscotta has it as well. Sopo Seafood in Portland, and I think they might have a location in South Portland, also has it. So those are the places right now that have it, and we're just ramping up our new facility, so we're hoping that more and more places carry it. We're going to hit a lot of the food co-ops and seafood places before we ramp up to places like Hannaford's, where it would be in the freezer department with the other frozen fish. And we think it's a great product that has a lot of different uses, and we actually have one of them here today. It's a fish dip with smoked eel. So it's after it's smoked, it's totally good to eat. And we smoke in-house now, which is really exciting. And one of my coworkers, who is a chef, prepared this dip for you guys. And so we'll have chip, a ruffle chip with the dip. And we can try that. I don't know if you guys, Carrie Ann has it pretty much ready over here.
Yeah.
Try that and give it a taste. And I want to let you guys experience it, and then I'll open the floor to questions. We have a lot more time, so we can have a discussion. It can go a lot of different ways with eel history and how they were discovered, and some Sigmund Freud is involved in eels somehow, and there's just a lot of interesting things. I think there's a German scientist that said on his deathbed that everything had been discovered that he wanted to discover except maybe for the eel. So it's just been a mystery for hundreds of years, and even now there's still articles that come out all the time that we read about, oh, this little aspect of eel life history was discovered. So yeah, feel free to go ahead and grab them.
Do you have pictures of inside your facilities?
We do not have pictures of inside the facility right now. Secret. You guys want to go ahead and grab anybody that wants them?
It's top secret, the inside of your...
It's not top secret. It's just barely been finished. So it's in Waldoboro.
Oh, it might have some of the tanks that they were in or something like that.
Yeah, we haven't quite gotten around to all of that yet. We just this is the first class of eels in there, so we're just kind of getting everything established. Kelsey. Yeah, I think it's just like mainly with a little bit of like cream cheese in there.
It's funny, so I don't.
Yeah, and like some chives. Yeah, no, she does a great job with it. We actually on Saturday were at the Waldo for that event.
Oh,
For that, yeah, and we had a little booth there, the Midcoast Conservancy event. Yeah.
I know, I had to go play pong hockey.
Yeah, I get it.
I was like, well, there you go.
Yeah, I was hanging out with Kelsey there, and yeah, it was really good. It's super
There's
nice.
a recipe.
Now I'm so sorry, it wasn't silly.
Halcyon was, right? Halcyon is the group, the
Oh,
string
yeah.
quartet. They're so good. They were amazing. I was really impressed with their playing.
So, Phil, I had a question.
Yeah.
I thought it would be fun to see if anyone did have an eel story. So I know my eel story is that growing up, there's a river in my parents' backyard, and my dad would go out in the evening and I don't know, any little scraps from dinner, he would always save a few and he'd put them in the river, and then within a few minutes there were just eels. And that was in New Jersey. So that's my eel story.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious if anyone else in here has an eel story.
Anybody else?
My grandfather used to trap eels for his mother down here in Callio's Cove.
Okay.
She loved eels. He
Yeah.
had a spike in the workshop and he'd stick it
Yeah.
in the head like a glove, peel the skin off it, dress them, and had a big cast iron spider
Oh.
frying pan in there. He said they'd wiggle around in the frying pan.
Yeah, they do that. Yeah, that's awesome. I love to hear people everybody's got a connection to eels and or have heard something about eels and yeah, it's if anybody has any questions that maybe I can't answer, this is our founder and CEO Sarah. That's her email and phone number. And if you guys want, if anybody has any questions, so write that down. I might direct you to that if I don't know the answer. Yeah.
So want to make sure I understand those little elvers were born out in that nursery area. The eels are breeding and the eels are born in that nursery area in the ocean.
Yeah.
And
Let's
then
go back to the.
they come inland to live out the rest of their life cycle. But do they ever go back? Are they anadromous or whatever they call
They're
it?
catadromous actually, which is the opposite of anadromous. So salmon breed in fresh water and live most of their lives out in salt water. That's anadromous. Catadromous, which is the opposite of that, is they live their adult lives in fresh water and then go out to the Sargasso Sea there to breed. Just like salmon, after they breed, that's it. They actually do this when they get to this silver life stage. They, you can see their eyes are larger because they're going to go down into deeper water. They actually lose. They don't eat once they get to this stage, or sometimes they pretend to eat, which is never fun for us because they keep trying to get food and they don't actually eat it. But they don't really eat, and they don't even have reproductive organs until they get to the silver life stage. One of the mysteries in the whole eel life stage is that they would get large adult-sized eels that are in this yellow eel stage that can be over a foot long, and they dissect them and found no reproductive organs. The Greeks thought that they just erupted out of the sand. The Egyptians thought that they rubbed up against rocks and their skin fluffing off would cause new eels to erupt out of that. They just couldn't find any reproductive organs on these large adult-sized fish, so they were like, we don't understand. So what happens, what we know now is they go through this yellow to silver life stage, and it's still kind of a mystery of what triggers that, because like I said, the females go way up into fresh water and breed, but sometimes and live. Sometimes they live there for 20, 30 years, and then come back down. So there's something that triggers them to switch to the silver life stage, and then once they're in the silver life stage, they just all power, all energy that they have, they go to breeding. And some more recent studies have found that it takes them sometimes a long time to get to their breeding grounds, the Sargasso Sea, like over a year. They could be traveling around. They've put trackers on European eels, which have a little bit farther to go because the Sargasso Sea is more on the western Atlantic. So the European eels have a little bit farther to travel. A year, 2 years to get back to the breeding grounds. And there was a Danish scientist that in the turn of the last century, I think he started in 1904 or something, he spent 19 years just trawling around this area looking for smaller and smaller fish to find out where they were breeding or what they were doing. And it took him a long time, but he narrowed it down to this area, and for 100+ years that was the best science that we had. Was this guy he wasn't really a trained scientist. He had his wife was the heir of the Carlsberg beer fortune, and so he got married and he said thanks for the money, and he went out and spent 19 years away from her, basically at sea. Maybe she did, but I don't think he could have done it without that money. And he trawled all over the Atlantic until he kept finding smaller and smaller eels. And I think it's somewhere in this area. But how it happened or anything was still a mystery. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Is there a difference in the flavor between the Asian eel and the European eel?
Yeah, I know that the Japanese, their species of eel, they really, really prize the flavor of it, very delicate flavor of it. It has, and I know a lot of times it has more of a blue, like the body is more of that blue color. Our eels kind of vary in between like an olive green, a brown, and a blue kind of color, and some of them have spotting. It's really pretty because they'll be all different colors. But I know that is different. I know that the Japanese really praise the flavor. Even in different prefectures in Japan, they'll be like, oh, our eel's better, and we cut it like this. Oh, no, our eel's better, and we cut the back open first. No, we cut the stomach open. They're very particular with, and it's like street food in Japan, like kabayaki. Like you go to New York City and get a hot dog, or any big city, you'd go down the street and there'd be a little stand and they would be doing it on the grill. And they have their vat of the eel sauce that they don't change out. Some of them are 40, 50 years old, that they just keep adding mirin or soy sauce into it, and they get eel drip. Every time you dip the eels in there, you get eel drippings, and it adds to that flavor. And so it's one of those things. Like I go to this one stand because they haven't changed their stuff in 50 years, and it's so good. So yeah. So I know the Japanese, their whole philosophy on eels is it's super deep rooted in their culture. I mean, you could read whole books about the Endo period and how eel was prepared then, and so it's interesting. I find how they deal with eels really interesting. Yeah.
That's like the Chinese wok. They call that the original self-cleaning oven.
Yeah. Yeah, you can.
You just keep whipping.
Yeah, you just keep adding.
It off.
And it just adds to the flavor. The dishes get better and better. Yeah, I can totally get on board with that. So it's the Europeans love their smoked eel. The English love their jellied eel, which I still have never tried. But yeah, so what you had is more of a European style of smoked eel, and we, as a value-added product for us, it sells really well and people really enjoy it. I know the Europeans tend to smoke it whole. In the United States, people don't tend to really like to know that their food has eyes and stuff like that. So we tend to we've kind of Americanize the smoking process for everybody. And I think it's a little bit more approachable. But yeah, and it's not something that that the Europeans eat every day. I was talking to a lot of Dutch people that they actually, it's like a special occasion. Like for Christmas, you might get smoked eel, and it's a super special treat to have that. So it's definitely valued. It's definitely a valued fish, and I think the traceability and sustainability that we're bringing to it adds to that value for sure. So I find everybody that tries it usually enjoys it. So even young kids really like it too. Yeah.
You're talking about the value of the fish. How do you see, its value and importance in Maine's economy? As we know that these waters are warming. As far as like the range of the eel, is this something we should be investing in? I know you guys just kind of got your facility going. Where do you see that kind of all fitting in?
So the range of the eel, we find eels to be super adaptable. They have a range all over this area with waters of various temperatures. They are very adaptable to different climate conditions. Clearly, when they go out to the Sargasso Sea and they mass breed, they get sort of a random jumble of genetics. So the site fidelity of an eel going back to say, this eel that came out of this lake, its offspring will go back to that lake. There's been no real solid evidence of that. Whereas some species of salmon I know are very like sockeye, are like they will always go back to that same lake that their parents did for generations and generations. So that being said, the water temperatures clearly vary over this range, and eels are very adaptable. I think the biggest thing, if we have to give them the opportunity to adapt. So they're really good at climbing and moving around, but like a large dam can be an issue. So removal of dams, even if I know hydroelectric dams tend to be an issue for adult eels, but elvers can get through because they're so small. They can go up. But even if you, say, remove one dam to get eels into a waterway, you can almost bank your eels up into a lake that is saying, we're going to work on getting this other dam removed. But so, because they're going to live 20, 30 years, you could have a long time to get that next dam out. So any little bit of help like that, they're not often thought about for fish ladders and dam removal. But if you go to any of the fish dams around here and look in the spring when, say, the alewives are running, and kind of look over in the cracks and the small dark spots in the pools, you'll see eels there. They'll use pretty much anything. If you give them a little bit of an opportunity, they're really good at adapting, but they just need to be given an opportunity. So to answer Karen's question, yeah, I think the adaptation for eels could be, and I think as a sustainable fishery, we're super impressed with how Maine has been managing the fishery. So I think it has good longevity for that.
Is there any research on the outgoing adult eels? Because we know how many baby eels come up the rivers.
Yeah.
Is there any research to know how many adult eels are leaving?
Yeah, there is some.
Like fish weir?
They do catch them in fish weirs and stuff like that. They don't tend to have a super specific time like the elvers do, where they all come in at once.
They always go out.
Like I said, it takes them over a year sometimes to get to the breeding ground. So I think they get to that spot that somehow triggers them to say, hey, I'm going to go silver. And at that point, they start making their way down. But they're going to spend a lot of time at various places along the way. So we couldn't say that the eels that we're going to catch this spring, I couldn't say that last year their parents were up in their lakes where they were breeding. I don't think you could say that with any level of confidence. So that's super interesting. So yeah, I think more work needs to be done on that for sure. But yeah, sir, do you have a question?
Well, I'm just thinking about the timing, how long it takes the the little guys, the transparents, to get up to the Elver stage, to be there, that's quite a distance.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking it may take a year or two just to do that.
yeah, we like them as glass eels. So when they come onto the continental shelf and do that transition into their glass eel stage, the fishermen tend to catch them in that glass eel stage. And glass eel, elver can sometimes be used interchangeably. We tend to say elvers start having pigmentation and get a little bit larger. But actually at Ripley Creek last year, I was giving a talk for the school, St. George School, and I went out into the creek at low tide and kind of flipped some rocks and looked around, and I scooped some glass eels that it was the right time of year for there to be glass eels coming up, but looking at this glass eel and the size of it and the coloration, I could tell you that it wasn't this year's glass eel. It could have been a glass eel that's been living there since last spring. So it's been kind of hanging out in that transition brackish water for a whole year. The males tend to hang out in that transition brackish water. So there's some eels that never really go up into fresh water, and they might be ready in a year to go back out and breed. Yeah.
How do you know if they're male or female if they don't develop their sex organs until they go back out to sea?
That's a great question, because they have done some tracking with them, and because that eel is going to live its life and then go right back out to sea, they've actually put trackers on eels that they can catch in that brackish area, and then caught them, dissected them, found out they were males. So there's a lot of work being done in eels. In Japan, they started trying to do some breeding with them, and they actually have been having an incredibly difficult time getting them to breed. They've been using pheromones, all sorts of things to try to get them, to breed. And I think they've successfully done it, but the amount of input it took, I think each elver is like $5,000. That's how much input it took to get them to breed. So it was quite an undertaking, and they as far as the scaling that up it's quite a ways away, I think. So we're relying on a wild cat for sure. Yeah.
So you've got this combination of their growth and their quite fatty tissue.
Yeah.
So what kind of a diet do you have for them?
They eat kind of a very similar diet to what they would eat in the wild. It's kind of a variety of it's like a variety mix in a pellet form, but it's kind of a good mixture of supplements and a little bit of fish meal and brewer's yeast and a bunch of different things. Fish diet science is super interesting and something that I don't really know that much about. So I actually can direct you to Sarah if you wanted to know more about what they are fed, but they eat a lot of different things, and they'll eat pretty much everything. They'll eat hot dogs, clearly, at Penn and Rahway, New Jersey. But they eat a lot of different things, so they're pretty adaptable in that way too, of just eating a variety of things. So
They'll eat all the fish in your aquarium.
yeah, they eat everything. They're very aggressive. They aren't aggressive with people as far as I've ever experienced handling them and stuff. They don't. At the worst that ever happens is you accidentally stick a finger in one of their mouths, and they don't even bite down. It's just like, it feels a little weird. You're like, oh, all right. But they are never aggressive to people, but they're pretty voracious out there, and bugs and all sorts of things, salamanders, and they found all sorts of things. Yeah.
Once in a while you see, it popped up recently somewhere on Facebook, a picture of the inside of an eel's mouth that's just ringed with terrifying teeth.
That might actually be a lamprey that you're seeing a picture of. Oh, is there a lamprey? I thought there was a lamprey on one of these posters. But yeah, it is a lamprey that you're thinking of, and they actually are kind of a primitive vertebrate that doesn't have a true jaw, right? They don't actually have a true jaw. They actually grab onto something like a larger fish and use those teeth and kind of wriggle back and forth. So they find fish with like perfectly circular wounds, and that's usually from lampreys.
And is that technically an eel, or is it something unto itself?
It's something unto itself. I know it's on the primitive vertebrate side of things, so it definitely predates bony fish. So the whole shark bony fish line is beyond the lamprey, but I'd have to redo my vertebrate zoology research to get you more information than that. But yeah, no, they're very interesting and look terrifying. And they'll just we can see them wriggling and they just kind of burrow like a perfectly circular hole. Yeah.
Speaking of Facebook, like Sue mentioned, yesterday on the Maine, if you're part of the Maine wildlife page, someone posted a picture of a mink on the side of the Madomic River in Waldoboro with a adult eel in its mouth.
A huge eel too. It was like a foot and a
Yeah.
half. Like
I could-
it was a little mink, and the eel was longer than the mink, and it was just like dragging it up the river. Good for the mink.
They're vicious.
Yeah. I actually have in Ripley. I've seen at the creek. I've seen mink jumping around the banks. Now that after seeing that, I'm like, I wonder if they're like trying to get because all that creek's pretty narrow up there, and they probably all have to go up through there, in and out of there. So I imagine the mink are like waiting for the eels to come in and out.
How do you handle the fish waste?
That's processed in the facility. So yeah, it's also we have biodigestion that is all processed in the facility.
Compost.
Yeah.
Where does it go? Is that what you're asking? Jay? Is that what you were asking? Is that what you were asking? Where does it go?
Yeah, what they do?
Yeah, the solids are pulled off for fertilizers, and yeah, so it's all handled in the facility. That's part of the facility is that we have to process all that.
Aquaponics, where they grow fish, that kind of
Yeah.
relationship.
Actually, in our business park, there's some people doing variety of things with fertilizers and seaweed and stuff. So we're really hoping to give them more of that, so it could really close the loop on all that sides. In fact, so we're hoping to have 100% of everything that comes out of the fish be used. So value-added products, and we're just on the edge of all of that. So these are the products we have right now. But definitely the variety of products that we can have is kind of amazing. Yeah, it's a high yield fillet. Even when you just fillet the fish, it's like over 70%. So it's really awesome in that way. I think it's the body shape. I think that really helps you out. And everybody says like filleting an eel is way easier than a lot of other fish. So yeah.
Do they make any noises?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. They kind of make little like squeaks and grunts sometimes that I've heard. Yeah, gulp, squeak, nothing like super loud. I think it's probably in line with what a lot of other fish make, kind of gulpy, squeaky, grunt kind of noises. But
Groupers.
yeah, oh yeah, some fish make some really loud noises. They make a little bit of noise, but not much. I always like to hear the noises they make, but it's not a common occurrence for me to hear them. Yeah.
And what was the connection between eels and Sigmund Freud?
He studied, of course, his fascination with reproduction and sexuality in general. He was studying how they reproduced. That was actually one of his first things he ever studied. And yeah, I felt like that led him down his path that he went on with psychosomatic, psychology. So yeah, that's what he was studying, the reproduction of eels. It's still up to then a mystery of, there was still a lot of belief that they just were like strung out of sand or rubbed up against rocks or before it was having them, a lot of scientists having dissected other fish, finding gonads and not being able to find that in an eel. They're like, how is this possible? But now we know.
Where is your business?
Waldoboro.
Ah.
Yeah.
On the river?
Yeah, we're not too far away from the river.
Do you have tours?
Not yet. No, we don't have tours yet. Like I said, we actually just finished it not being a construction site. And we're working on cleaning up and scaling up and everything like that. And so we don't have tours yet, but we'll see.
You have competition.
Not in the United States. There isn't any really competition in the United States. Like I said, there are German. I know there's German aquaculture facilities that are raising eels. Dutch facilities. I know they're doing some in like Lithuania. There's some countries in Africa. I've heard about, but I need to do more research. But as far as the United States product that is all raised here, this is the only one.
Did you go look at those, or any of those facilities?
We actually have had a lot of help from Dutch engineering firms to help us build out the facility. So we've sent people over to look at the other facilities and borrowed and adapted and learned a lot from them. They've been very, very helpful with teaching us the ways of scaling up for sure. Sarah's been running eels in aquaculture facilities for 8-9 years, so she's got a lot of experience, but scaling up is definitely a different beast that we've been working on. So,
Well, she scaled up out of her basement, right?
yeah, she started in the basement, and in fact, I will put.
And fun fact, Sarah Rademacher is former employee of Harrington Learning Center.
Yeah, I think that's how she got started in Maine, like being in Maine and stuff, is working here.
Rademacher.
Yeah, here, and if anybody wants to get more details on the recirculating system or anything like that, feel free to write down her email, and we'll have someone get back to you on that.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Phil, thank you so much for
course.
presenting today, really appreciate it.
Yeah,
And I think there's still some.
There's plenty
there's plenty to try there,
chips
yeah.
and dip, and there's also if you're interested in purchasing any of the product, like at places like Jess's or Rising Tide Co-op, Demarestata also sells it. There's a little recipe on here on the back. I think there's more on your website, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of recipes on the website as well, as far as for the smoked eel, my personal favorite is ELTs. So you just get you cut smoked eel into like strips, and you get a pan, like a heavy bottom pan, like a cast iron or something, really ripping hot, and then you do for like 5 minutes. And you don't need any oil or anything like that. 5 minutes of these little eel strips you've made, and then you can assemble your eel, lettuce, and tomato sandwich with the mayo, or like you can do it with something fancy, and it's just
No bones in it.
no. Yeah, at that point, after you smoke it, no bones, it's like super rich, fatty, great for in that case for like a bacon replacement. Definitely a lot healthier, and I think more delicious.
Good for a keto diet.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, the intramuscular fat in there is amazing. Like you could just it cooks in its own fat really well, and doesn't really require a lot of other input. So chefs love it, and I think home chefs definitely could love it too. I think you just gotta get used to like cooking it a little bit longer than you think for other like whitefish. It's kind of on the border between like a whitefish and like a heavier like tuna swordfish as far as like what you can do with it as cook time. Doesn't require as long, but yeah.
So it
Well,
gets,
Go ahead, no.
it gets a lot of racism myself. I mean, is that possible to have a tank down in your basement like my wife's afraid of?
I don't see why not. You can raise
Buying from the glass seals.
Yeah, getting
You
access.
legally buy them.
Yeah, I mean we're the only place you can legally buy
You can't
them.
dip them yourself and go do it.
No, you definitely cannot. They're also very good escape artists, so if you were gonna
Yeah.
do that, I would recommend.
Yeah, I know there's been.
Play.
I know in the 70s there's some guy that had an open pond that he was using for other things, and he was like, "Oh, let me try to raise eels," and he got eels and put them in there, and like within like a week they were
Quarries
gone.
are full of them.
They were just like gone. So yeah, I know it's definitely they were really good at escaping, wiggling out, finding a way out.
I had one in the aquarium and I found it on the floor all dried up and it was dead. I put it back in the tank and it sloughed off its skin and came back to life
Yeah.
again.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
The cat eventually ate it.
they can live for a really long time when they're trying to get to the
filter.
ponds and lakes. They can crawl over rock for really long periods of time.
Yeah, wet times, just wet ground.
Yeah, if it's wet ground or wet rocks, anything like that, they can move for a really long time over that. So, and they're surprisingly fast.
I could run into them.
Crazy little critters.
Yeah, they're pretty crazy. Any other questions?
Is unagi the Japanese word for eel?
Yeah, I guess I should have mentioned that. Yes, unagi is the Japanese word for eel. So we were tying in that kind of cultural significance of the word unagi in America, growing in here.
Who did the lettering?
Actually, I think one of my coworkers' partners did the lettering, and I think this is kind of
Excellent.
reminiscent of a Japanese character. A lot of people told me, so I think that was the inspiration. But yeah,
Are those what the little thing that look like ears? Gills or?
those are actually pectoral fins.
Oh, pectoral.
They do kind of look like ears. If you look at them straight on, a lot of times they'll have their pectoral fins out, and they look like kind of goofy little ears.
Yeah.
I think they're really cute, but
Like Loch Ness.
maybe I'm just staring at them too long. But I think they're really cute, and they have their little pectoral, and then their dorsal fin and their caudal fin, their tail fin, and their anal fin all connect. So it's like one big paddle. This it's called anguilliform motion. The way they swim is like very, very efficient. I think it's like over 80% efficient for energy burning. So they can swim for a really long time on a very little amount of calorie burn. So
They like living under the mud and substrate in the aquarium,
Yeah.
and they'd stick their head up and just strange things.
yeah,
Strange.
yeah, they're really good at surviving. They're just really, they've
travel
really
a lot of
adapted
ways
well to
under
surviving.
the gravel.
So in the tank then, do you have mud?
No, we don't
Is it
have.
just a tank?
It's a tank, but they have a hammock to hang out in. They have a relaxing kind of hammock type setup to hang out in. So
River tanks.
yeah, they eat and then they just are super lazy and they just want to lay around sometimes for a long period of time. Yeah.
Can you quickly just share, or would you mind sharing how they eat?
Yeah, they actually when they get big enough, we have taught them to feed themselves. So they kind of tap on a little dispenser and they are able to feed themselves.
Oh my
So.
gosh.
They're really smart, and once you get them to a certain size, they're pretty much indestructible. So, which is good. But they can feed themselves, and which is interesting. When they're done eating, they stop feeding, and then
That opens all kinds of, think of the
Yeah.
tricks you could teach me.
Yeah. Yeah, and we think about, you are giving them, when you have a dispenser for feed, you're giving them feed at a certain interval and thinking, okay, every hour I'll give them some feed. But they don't want the feed, it just goes to waste. So this way it's like super efficient with feed. They just eat when they want to eat.
And then how do you change, do you have the water changing all the time?
Yeah, it's part of the recirculating system. It gets filtered and we pulled out the solids and it gets filtered and reused. So yeah.
Mhm. Amazing.
I'd like to thank you all very much for coming. And mark the calendars for March 13th, when we have oysters and kelp as our next cabin fever series. And just to give you a heads up, while we're going to change the title, we plan on continuing our sort of weekday adult-focused programming through the spring and summer with a variety of other topics. It may include actually some excursions to local places as well. So. Phil, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate it.
Summer camp.
Thank you folks. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it. I love talking about this stuff, so it's great.
Okay.
Next month is gonna be at noon. I know if